Buongiorno, buonasera, benvenuti amici. Welcome my friends. My name is Vincenzo and welcome to my channel, Fountain Pen Therapy. Well, welcome to this part 2 of a 4-part series, which may in fact become a 5-part series on Fountain Pen Nibs Demystified, a comprehensive review. Indeed, it's comprehensive. You've seen part 1. Now, from some of the comments that I received, I realized that it's very difficult to do this kind of a series because there's so many factors. Okay, you have, when you're evaluating a nib, it depends on the ink that you're using. It depends on the paper on which you're writing. It depends if the nib has been tuned, not tuned. There's a lot of factors, and then there's the subjective factor, the individual himself and how he, his habits, his writing habits, etc., etc. So I think all of this has to be taken with it. It's a one point of view, and you've got to get out there and experiment yourself. I think the goal, the objective, my objective is to raise some awareness and inspire you to go out there and try different things, and then ultimately find what you prefer and draw your own conclusions. I think that's the fun behind all this. It's not meant to be a scientific course on nibs where I'm telling you the truth and nothing but the truth. Far from it. I'm having a lot of fun doing this, and I'm going to continue to have a lot of fun doing this. It provides me with a lot of fountain pen therapy. It shares with you my own points of view, and they're my points of view. And you know what? If it can get you to draw your own conclusions, well, then I think I will have achieved the objective that I sought out to achieve. So, without any further ado, let's look at this second part. In this second part, we're going to be concentrating on 2 main subjects. First subject, true or false. The best nibs are gold nibs, followed by titanium, and then followed by steel. The second part, we'll take a look at this whole dilemma, standard nibs or mainstream nibs versus in-house nibs. And I'll give you some of my thoughts in that regard. So, without further ado, stay tuned for part 2. Okay, so we're back. Let's take a look at the first thing that I'd like to mention as part of this first part, which is, best nibs are gold, followed by titanium, and then steel. Is that a true or false proposition? Is it something that's easily determined and concluded? Well, I'd like to take a look at a few points. First of all, I got to tell you that, and maybe we can just go back to here. My views on nibs and gold nibs is kind of evolved, and I would say that 2024 is probably where I really evolved tremendously in terms of knowledge, experimenting, and actual possession of gold nibs. At the outset, and I've been collecting for a long time, I had a couple of gold nibs or gold nib pens, but I never really said to myself that it was worth the extra price. And I think that opinion has changed, and has changed drastically. And I think you should not draw that conclusion until you've had a chance to taste the menu, so to speak. Okay. Having said that, I'm going to show you an example of what I think is not worthwhile. And let me just go down to my notebook here. I've got two pens for you. Okay. One from Phosphor. This is a handmade pen that has a gold nib, and this is a Penlux masterpiece. One of the best JOWO stub nib pens that I have in my collection. They're both stubs. And I'm going to show you the difference between a JOWO gold and a JOWO steel, and determine whether or not one is worth the price. Before we do that, why don't I show you what the difference in price is? So, let me just go to my computer here. Okay, this is FP Nibs, which for me is a site where you can buy several brands of nibs, including everything you want to buy for JOWO, Schmidt, and Bock. And as you could see, a JOWO number 6, and we'll deal with number 6 because number 8s are, it's a different ball game. But number 6, which is a more mainstream nib, you could see here that a 14 karat number 6 JOWO nib is $149, as compared to, I would say, roughly $20 for a normal steel nib. If you go to the 18 karat, it's $187. Now, it is my, so you could see the spread there. It's quite a bit. If go, for example, on the Leonardo site, and I just picked, a very popular pen, which is the Momento Zero, in various models. You could see that the Momento Zero, for example, would go for $137. Actually, that's 137 euros, which in dollars is even more. And a gold nibbed version of that pen is 323 euros. So almost a spread of 200 euros there, or something close to that, almost 190 euros, which is like $200 spread between two JOWO nibs. Now, it is my firm opinion that if we're going to talk about JOWO nibs, I don't believe that the difference is so drastic that it's worth the price, and it's something that you may want to consider before spending that extra money on a gold nib. This is the JOWO 14 karat. Is it 14 or 18? Yeah, this is the 14 stub. So this is the JOWO 14 karat. Number 6 stub. Okay, very nice, smooth, wet. This is the Penlux that sports a JOWO number 6 steel stub. And I gotta tell you that I can hardly feel the difference. I don't think it's worth the extra, what is it, $120? I really don't believe that I would spend money upgrading a pen to a JOWO nib. That's just a personal opinion, okay? And my previous experimenting with was really based on that. In my head, it was JOWO, German nib, and not having tasted the menu, as so to speak, about not having had the opportunity to actually try all the beautiful gold nibs that actually do exist, most of which I've got to tell you I acquired this year, I had drawn some very erroneous conclusions, and comparing the JOWO, I said to myself, you know what, gold nibs are not worth it, and drew a very general conclusion, which I think is unfounded. So, but if you ask me, would you pay more for a JOWO gold nib? The answer is definitely not. Now, the second thing I'd like to point out is that what I discovered very quickly, and I'm going to try to put some shots up on the screen for you, is that ultimately, whether you're dealing with a gold nib or a steel nib, it's the tipping on that nib that is essentially important. And to my great surprise, I quickly learned that the tipping often is what people would like to think is an iridium tipping. So the tipping is the same, whether you have a gold nib or whether you have a steel nib. And I'm going to show you a macro shot of the tippings here. So you can see the tipping, and the tipping is not made out of steel, and it's not made out of gold necessarily. Okay, there are exceptions, and there's all kinds of specialized nibs, and we won't deal with that. We're going to deal with mainstream. Now, what is iridium? Well, I'm sure you've seen, if not, you may have seen, and I can show you another macro shot of pens being sold with nibs like this, where on the nib itself, you have inscribed iridium point. You can see the tipping on that nib, and they want you to believe that it's iridium. Well, if you do some research, my understanding, again, I'm being very general and quick here, just a summary, is that iridium tipped nibs have not existed since the early 1950s. Okay, iridium is an element that is extremely rare and very expensive, so it's no longer being used. Okay, that's my understanding. What is really being used is a mixture of ruthenium, tungsten. It's an alloy with some stainless steel thrown in. But what essentially is the objective here is to have a tipping that is very, 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 very tough, durable, and gold and steel per se would not have done the trick. So you have to use a different tipping. Now, having said that, it may very well be that, for example, an expensive pen like a Pelikan M1000, the tipping is probably of a higher quality, as compared to maybe some cheap, non-expensive. I'm going to use the example of Chinese nib. But here again, yes, that tipping may be different, but it's got nothing to do with steel or gold. The tipping is not steel or gold. So that's the first thing you have to understand. Okay, so we're back. So if the tipping oftentimes is the same, or we're not talking about gold and steel tipping on the nibs, and what's the fuss? Why do gold nibs come at such a premium, and why are they so attractive? Well, first thing, I would argue that high-end, high-priced pens, such as the three that you see here, the Visconti Homo sapiens, the Pelikan M1000, and the Montblanc 149, the gold nib is part of a package, and it's the overall package that attracts and often explains the difference in price. With Montblanc, you're paying for that name, essentially, because between you and I, you're talking about a plastic pen, essentially. Okay, Pelikan, again, it's its reputation. It's its the style, its existed, its size, its build quality, etc. The same thing with this Homo sapiens. It's made of special materials. So the gold nib is just part of a package, okay? And in order to make it more luxurious, well, we'll throw in a gold nib. And it's somewhere along the line, you're paying for it. Okay, that's the first thing. The second thing I would argue is that often gold nibs are more attractive. Okay, they're more ordained. They're just they put a lot more into the nib. For example, just to show you this 149, which by the way has evolved over the years, and you may have different versions, but take a look at that. It's dual toned. It's got all kinds of engravings and engravings and kind of designs. It's a beautiful nib, okay? And gold allows you to make it even nicer, if you will. The same can be said for what I believe is probably the most beautiful nib on the market, at least in my opinion, which is this Pelican on this Pelican M1000. I mean, take a look at that. You actually have the Pelican there, right? Beautiful, just a beautifully ordained, beautiful nib. You could argue that this Visconti, maybe not as elaborate as the other two, is also, it's got its beauty, it's rose gold, and I'm giving you just two examples among many examples. Okay, so you would say, well, it's worth the price because just take a look at how attractive those nibs are, and that attraction just makes the writing experience all that more enjoyable, and it may be worth that extra price. But having said that, there are steel nibs that are extremely attractive. Let me just show you a few examples how, if we're going to say, yeah, but gold nibs are just nicer, more attractive than steel nibs, that's not necessarily true. For example, we can take a look at this Visconti nib, which is a steel nib on this Van Gogh, which arguably is, just as attractive as that Visconti nib on the Homo sapiens. Okay? So, very nice nib. We can take a look at this Leonardo Momento Zero Grande with this Le Fenice nib. Very well decorated, and it's got all kinds of engravings. A beautiful nib. And it's steel. Take a look at this Joya nib. Rose gold or rose gold plated. Again, very nicely decorated. Very attractive nib. We have this Andean nib, which is extremely intricate in terms of all the design work on that nib. In fact, you would argue when you look at this, you say, wow, that looks like a gold nib. And we'll take a look at how it performs in just a few minutes. So, it's just as nice. I have this Vizier pen, okay? And Vizier is an Indian company. And take a look at this JOWO nib, how it's been worked. I mean, it's I don't know if you could see that, but it's got, all kinds of beautiful decorative. Now, you pay a premium for this type of nib, but it is possible, okay? So is it really because they're prettier? Perhaps, but it's not to say that, is it worth the $200, $300 more? I think you can find some very pretty, well-decorated steel nibs as well. Now, what else does gold give us in terms of, to justify the price? Well, some would say that, there's this belief that, well, somehow gold nibs are just smoother than steel. But again, the tipping is the key. And gold and steel have got nothing to do with that, the material, the tipping material. So, it could depend on the grind, okay? It could, oftentimes, it depends on how the pen is tuned, okay? And you could, say you could have some very well-tuned steel nibs with a grind, and which is just as smooth, arguably, as gold. So, for example, here are a few examples of what I mean. For example, you have this beautiful, well-tuned Omas Ogaiva fine nib, okay? So this is a Omas, and I have, just took it out of, I haven't tested this before, fine. Okay, and it writes beautifully, smooth, it's wet. But let's compare it to this fine JOWO, it's a JOWO nib on this Joya, for example. This is the Joya, and it's a fine. And folks, they're very, very, very close, very equivalent to each other. This is one example. Let me give you another example. I have, where's my Ancora? Here we go. I've put it in this Navlor, but I've got this beautiful Ancora. It's just an absolutely gorgeous nib, by the way. It's a medium 18 karat nib that I've, the Ancora pen, the core of the pen broke on me. So I've put it on this Navlor. And so this is a Ancora medium that is absolutely luscious, okay? You can hardly, it's like writing on water. And I can compare that to a JOWO or a Bach or even an Andean medium on, for example, I have here a Delta, okay, a Dune or Duna with a JOWO nib. So this is a JOWO medium. Which gives me equivalent value and equivalent writing experience. So, a well-tuned steel nib versus a well-tuned gold nib, one would argue, well, why pay $300 more? And there must be other reasons. Well, another reason often invoked is that usually more expensive gold-nibbed luxury pens, the chances are that the nibs out of the box are perfect. I think that one example of that would be Pilot. I think Pilot nibs are probably the most consistent in terms of out of the box. Is this a 743 or the 742? Let me just, yeah, this is the 743. So this is the Pilot Custom 743, which just, it's the FA 15 nib which gives me a little bit of, but it, you know, I could say the same thing of my Pilot A23. You know, right out of the box, these nibs are almost 100% of the time just bang on. But the same thing, actually. I mean, Mont Blanc has never been my favorite, but I got to tell you that very rarely will you get a Mont Blanc nib that is not smooth and well tuned right out of the box. Now, is it 100% all the time? Probably not, but most of the time. But I think you often get a Bach nib or a JOWO nib from a medium-priced outfit or brand pen that unfortunately the pen needs some tuning. But the same thing can go for my gold. For example, I bought this Optima Aurora Sole Mio in Italy, which goes for roughly $500. And you know what? Out of the box, this nib was a little scratchy and was not at its optimum, excuse the pun, and needed a little work on my part. So there's no guarantee. It does happen. If we're going to talk about gold nibs that failed, I think that one of the classics examples would be the Visconti before with their palladium nib, and even with their gold nibs right at the outset when they changed, it was kind of hit and miss. And often people tell you, if you're going to invest that kind of money in a pen like this, you should try it before, or make sure that the dealer selling you this pen tries and tunes the nib, make sure that when it's put in the box, it works. And I hesitated to buy this pen until I was in Italy and I was in the Novelli shop in Rome, and I tried it, and it wrote beautifully, and I purchased it. And to this day, this Visconti fine nib is just a work of art. So again, there's no guarantee, but the chances are that if you're going to buy a Pelican M1000 with a gold nib, the chances are that that Pelican M1000 will have a very well-tuned nib. Is it worth the $200-300 more? Again, I'm struggling, right? I still not convinced if we're looking at arguments. So let's go on. What else do we need to look at if we're going to talk about, you know, gold nibs being better than titanium or steel nibs? And that brings us, I think, to one major argument, which I think if you try enough gold nibs, you can draw pretty well a conclusion in that regard, is that, in my view, the most important element that makes the difference between gold and steel is the bounce. Now, we have to be careful with vocabulary here because it could evoke different things to different people. And I will explain myself through maybe some writing samples. I believe that gold nibs, generally speaking, have more bounce. They have a softer writing experience. They're a little more flexible without being, you know, a flex nib, which, when you combine that with a beautifully attractive or beautifully decorated and attractive nib in a luxury pen, renders the entire writing experience much more pleasant than a nice looking pen with a JOWO or a Bock or a Schmidt nib. As beautiful as that JOWO or Bock nib can be ordained or branded. Okay? Yet, are all gold nibs soft and bouncy or flexy? Well, let me give you two examples. I have this beautiful duofold, 1990s, with this just gorgeous, gorgeous gold nib, 18 karat. But I gotta tell you that this nib is stiff as a nail. Does it write nicely? Sure it does. Is it smooth? Is it constant? Yeah, but it doesn't have that bounce. It's equivalent to a very stiff, fine JOWO nib, for example, because they usually are, okay, at that level, at the fine level. Same thing can be said with this beautiful gold Omas Ogiva, okay? Omas, fine nib, and this is not because they do come in the soft or flexi version, but the normal or the ordinary fine nib that comes with this Omas is fairly stiff. So there's no guarantee of that. Okay, it depends on the model there again. And if we're going to talk about bounce, well, what about this Hongdian, which is about $100? Okay, I mean, this thing, talk about a nib that has a bounce. Okay, this one I think is the fine or extra fine, but they both have, take a look at the bounce on this thing. And we all know that Hongdian nibs have a gold-like bounce. The same thing goes with, what is this? Is this the A7? I forget now. Yeah. So, I mean, wow. Talk about a bounce and flex. Yeah. It's got it. Take a look at that. It's just got that bounce. So, you take a look at this and you say to yourself, wow, I have this stipula lucens with a steel nib. And take a look at the bounce on this thing. I mean, to the point where you think it's gold. No, this is the stipula. Quite a bit of bounce. Quite a bit of bounce. So, are they all steel nibs got that bounce? I don't think so. I think generally speaking, the few examples I've given you are probably the exception to the rule. I mean, if we're going to talk about bounce, you can't compare even the Hongdian to, for example, this this Aurora 88 with this 18 karat bouncy. Talk about a bouncy nib. Very, very, very nice. You can't compare it to the bounce. And, Mont Blanc, it's got a nice feeling as well. Maybe not as flexy as some other, but, it's just soft. You've got, of course, the Pilot 823 that is very soft. You've got this Pelican, talk about softness, the ultimate softness in a gold nib, without being a flex nib, if you will, would probably be in this Pelican M1000. There's just something about that nib that is soft and bouncy. And, of course, some gold nibs provide, even more. And let me give you an example. Then we can get carried away and take a look at this Magna Carta. Okay, there's no ink in here, but the Magna Carta flex nib, which of course is just, it's unbelievably flexed. I have my Peniter quill nib, okay, which is, talk about a flexy nib. Can you get that flex in a steel? I don't think so. Yes, you do have, for example, the JOWO elastic nib, which does provide some flexibility. It doesn't write, but again, not consistent. It does provide some flexibility, but does it give you that same softness? I don't think so. It's more akin to a nib that kind of springs on you, but you don't have that soft quality. You do have the FPR steel nib that some would argue is, soft. But again, I would not, fountain pen revolution nib, I would not say that this nib, as flexy as it is soft. It because it springs back. It's really a flex nib. And you can't compare it to a gold flex nib, which is even softer, just to the touch. Then you have examples like Noodlers, which can give you a very nice flexy sort of a feeling, but not that softness. So, and if we're going to talk about soft, that's where maybe we get into differentiating titanium to steel. Because in my view, the titanium nibs are much softer than the steel nibs. Let me give you an example. This Mayora Ogiva T22 with this number 8 titanium nib has the softness. And it's somewhere in between the gold. So in between the gold and the steel, if you will. Okay? The same thing can be said in this. I have another titanium nib here, a Bach again. Take a look at the flex here. It's got no ink, but take a look at the flex in there. It's just, there is ink. Very nice. So if you're looking for a softer writing experience without, the major bite, then these titanium nibs, I think, are a real option. Does it rival, for example, this Scribo Field of Flex? Absolutely not. Look at this pen. I have not written with this thing in weeks, and it is so soft that it just makes that writing experience so much more enjoyable. And of course, then the question becomes: is it worth, the $600-700? In my opinion, and that's an opinion that I've come to only this year, after having tried all of these beautiful gold nibs, and the answer is unfortunately yes. It just, if you cannot afford it, is there an alternative? Absolutely. Those titanium nibs, I think are worthy of mention. Definitely. And if there's something that you're looking for in terms of softness, that titanium nib can prove to be quite a good compromise. So for this first part, if we could just to have some conclusions. And again, there's nothing scientific. I'm sharing with you my point of view. And that is, let me just, you can see my face here. I mean, 2024 for me, as I mentioned, I repeat, has been a year of discovery, okay? I have, for the longest of time, purchased pens with JOWO and Bock nibs. Beautiful pens. Leonardo's at one point when they had come out, I was buying them, one after the other. I have like 10 of them. Same thing with Bock nibs. I was getting many pens with beautiful Bock nibs, and they did the job, and I was stuck with stub. I mean, I change everything into a stub, all the nibs. And the beauty about JOWO and Bock is that you can, for $20, you can switch and you can experiment. And I could switch all my fine nibs and put stub nibs in them. And I was happy. The writing experience was fun because the stub kind of gave you that line variation naturally, made your handwriting look much better than it was. And then this year I discovered Pilot. I first purchased the 823. Then I purchased the 74. Then I purchased the 743. Then I purchased the 742. Then I purchased the Falcon nib. All gold nibs. Wow. Wow. Talk about a nice nib. I purchased the Pelican M1000. My wife, reintroduced me to Mont Blanc with the 149. Then Italy came along, and I got the Visconti, and I've got the Scribo, and I got the Pineider, and I got the Delta. Gold nibs, beautiful gold nibs. Then I was introduced to Flex, and I got the Mag 600. And I started looking at vintage gold nibs with this bouncy, flexy nibs, that juicy, that gives you the writing experience out of this world. And where you can actually take a fine nib and turn it into a broad because of the flex. But I think that all of that I owe to the gold nib. It was my discovery of the gold nib and the softness in the gold nib. Yes, paid at a premium, that introduced me to the flex. Okay? No, I'm not a flex guy. I can't, I'm not an artist. I'm not into the calligraphy, but I can appreciate the flex all of a sudden. And I owe that to the gold nib. I went from steel, stiff, to gold with a little bit of bounce, to, I flirted with titanium and realized, wow, and then I decided to take the jump and I went into gold. And I quickly realized that a fine gold nib has bounce and does have a little bit of line variation. And that line variation that I was previously looking to in the stub is in the fine. It's in the medium in a gold nib. And that got me going, and then the vintage came along. And then when you get some of these vintage nibs giving you that, the juicy, flexy writing experience, well, it kind of rounds things off. So, but what do I owe that to? I owe it to the gold nib. So my conclusion is that ultimately the gold nib is worth the price. JOWO? No. Bock gold? No. I would not spend $150 more for those stamps. On the other hand, I can tell you that maybe I'm just fed up with pens using JOWO and Bock. And that's why I'm so interested in the Chinese pen market, because we've been introduced to, all kinds of things because of the Chinese. Pen BBS gave us these wonderful nibs. Hongdian gave us these wonderful nibs. Mahjong, Wingsung, Kegaloo. Now we have the Admock using Schmidt. Now we have, even the Asvine using Bock. No, stay away from that. I mean, that's one of the reasons that was so attracted to the Chinese pens, is that they had good-looking pens that worked with these original nibs at a very low cost price. Now what they're doing is they're giving us beautiful pens, but more expensive because they're going back into JOWO. Well, I'm fed up of JOWO. Leonardo is a nice company and it makes beautiful pens, but how many JOWO nib pens can we have in our collection? Does the pen make a difference? The carcass? Sure it does. I mean, I had in my comments, come on, pen makes a difference. I agree. Like I said, holding this M1000, which is probably the most comfortable pen on the market, as big as it is, the carcass does make a difference. But, how many Momento Zero Grandes or Momento Zeros can you have? Yes, one is maybe ebonite and gives you a little bit different touch, but basically they're all resin, and you get fed up. And that's why I enjoyed the variety that the Chinese pen market was giving us. But at the end of the day, I would say to you that gold nibs from companies like Pelikan, Pilot, Scribble, Peniter, to name a few, yeah, they're worth it. Yeah, and they are better than the steel version, to the point where I don't think I'm going to buy another Pilot pen that has a steel nib. And talk about Pilot, totally affordable, unless we're talking about the Urushi and the Urushi 845, and even the Urushi 845, I think for that number 15 nib is a beautiful nib. I'm on the hunt for Sailor. I've got one Sailor pen to speak of, and I think that next year or the coming months are going to be Sailor month. I'm looking at King of Pen to see that, to give me that Sailor experience. But again, you got that gold 21 karat, soft, but at the same time feedback sort of a nib that gives you a writing experience that you can't get in steel nibs, but you can get them in Chinese nibs, and that's what I'm getting at. The Chinese nibs are giving us the bounce, the softness, the difference. But the JOWO and the Bach, I'm just fed up with that. Which brings us to part two. And part two is standard nibs versus in-house nibs. So give me a second. I'm going to take a little bit of drink of water and we'll be right back to discuss that second chapter. Okay, so what is my opinion about standard mainstream nibs versus in-house nibs? I think that I've come to the conclusion that I'm now hunting for pens that have their own in-house nibs. I'm hunting for Pilot, and I'm almost there. I'm going to hunt for Sailor. I'm going to hunt for increase my collection in Pelikan. I need that M800, and I probably need the M600 as well. I'm in the Pilot. I think I'm going to have to taste that Urushi, be it the 845 or the big massive one. Okay, Omas has now come up with the calligraphy Bologna with a Regalia CrossFit soft nib. I've ordered it. It's in-house nibs, I think, are what needs to be. I remember that when I spoke to Nino Marino during the summer, when I visited him at his factory, I said, Nino, Delta is basically now producing pens with JOWO nibs. Why not the in-house nib? And he said, Vincenzo, we're working on it. But it's an expensive proposition. If you're a small manufacturer, the chances are you don't have the facility or the cash to manufacture in-house nibs at that kind of volume. Pilot, Pelikan do. And that's where you look at companies like Santini and Scribble, which essentially are small, a dozen people. And they're coming out with their own in-house nibs. Although some would say that the nibs are coming out of big factories with modifications, there's always that ambiguity, if you will. But he explained to me that he's working on a project. That's what Nino told me. But it takes a lot of work and it takes a lot of money to be able to come up with, an in-house nib on a very regular basis. And that brings me to, compare my Delta Dolce Vita original with that beautiful 18 karat gold nib with this Dolce Vita version 2 modern with that JOWO nib. I mean, there is no way that I would replace this nib or replace that nib with this. Why did I want this one and not another Dolce Vita, even with a number 8 sized JOWO? It just, this is the pen that I wanted, okay? And, he produced for me a beautiful pen with a beautiful gold nib, which were the original Delta gold nibs. But even then, these were, I think, Bock manufactured, but somehow modified by Delta. I would accept that as an alternative. I've heard that maybe the scribble pens may not be entirely in-house. If there is a kind of middle of the road that would not give me that same boring JOWO Bock Schmidt nib, I would take it. But that's one of the reasons I'm staying away from Leonardo. It's because I just am fed up with the standard nibs. I was excited to buy them at the outset, but I realized that even if the look is different and even the materials are different, it's really that same JOWO nib, and it just doesn't do it for me anymore. That's why I was a little bit excited when I saw the Le Fenice nib come out of a Leonardo pen. That even there, that gives me a little more, a different look. It's not quite an in-house nib, but certainly better than a factory JOWO nib with no branding at all on it. But there again, would I pay more for a JOWO gold? No, I wouldn't. We've covered that. And, it's one of the reasons why when you look at JOWO, I was looking to buy, and I'll give you a bunch. We've got Delta, you've got Mayora, we've got Nettuno, we've got Gioia, we've got Molteni, we've got Radius, Ranga, Lotus, Easterbrook, Edison, all JOWO nibs. The little manufacturers hand turn all their nibs with all the different resins. You've got quite a few, one-man show sort of operations. They're offering you Bock and JOWO. That's why I'm attracted to Indian pens. Vizier's got in-house pens. Canwright, as much as Canwright's quality, if they could just improve their quality on the body of their pens, those Canwright nibs are just fabulous. I mean, I really, really, really like. You got Cypress, who's doing gold nibs, in-house, beautiful nibs. And those are, I think, the companies that I'm attracted to these days, as opposed to JOWO and Bock. And again, the Chinese offer you that variety, but so do the Indian pen companies. And it's something that we shouldn't shy away from. We should encourage. And that's why I always like to review a nice Indian pen. And some of them do have the JOWO. But, you got Magna Carta. And Magna Carta now has come out with the Urban Fude nib, which I'm going to be, I've either reviewed it already or will be reviewing it at the time that this particular video. A fabulous nib. Just a fabulous nib. In fact, give me a second. I'll go get it. So let me give an example of an in-house nib that I'm attracted to these days. Magna Carta. I got a steel nib in this 1000, I think it is. I mean, this Magna Carta, take a look at that. This is steel, but it's huge, and it writes fabulously, just absolutely fabulously. There's, of course, my 600. Let's see if this writes. Yeah, I mean, they have revolutionized flex nibs again. This is like a vintage Waterman. So much fun. And now they've come out with this Magna Carta Urban, which has this slender body, almost like a paintbrush. And it's got that Fude nib. And let me tell you, what a beautiful nib this is. Really, really nice. And depending on the angle, of course, you can get either a very thick line or a very thin line. But what I find is that this pen I could use almost on an everyday basis. So this is fun about this makes I think our hobby much more attractive than, the boring JOWO standard German mainstream nibs, which work fabulously. I'm not, and are worth $20. But this little gem that was sent to me by Applebaum on loan, and I reviewed it, and I think I'm going to keep it. It's just, this is what I'm looking for in difference. We're talking about fountain pen revolution with their nibs. As much as people might hate their pens, that nib, that flex nib, steel nib, and I heard the gold nib is even more. That's in-house. This is what I think we should be looking at. We've got Asvine, which has come out this year with the V200, and most recently has come out with the J16. But the J16's got a JOWO nib, and it's, at least last I checked, not offered with the Asvine nib, which is not what I'm looking for. It's not what I'm looking for. That I could tell you. We have JOWO, Majon, Hongdian, Wingsung. They're offering now extra fine. They're offering fine nibs. They're offering medium nibs. They're offering heartbeat nibs, long knife, long blade, hand polished, number 6, number 8, different styles, decorated. You got Pen BBS that comes out with all these calligraphy nibs. That's what it's all about, folks. Not JOWO, Bock, and Schmidt. As attractive as they are, and I'm still buying them so I can review them for you, but that's not what is giving me fountain pen therapy, folks. Fountain pen therapy for me these days is what things like what Magna Carta is doing to the market. And I'm looking and I'm hunting for vintage nibs, because those vintage nibs are giving me the pleasure right now. You can find a nice pen at $150, $200, some old Pelicans, some old Watermans. Yes, they're finicky, and you've got to buy them from reputable sources, because you don't want to be stuck with a pen that you're buying just for parts, unless you get into resurrecting pens and repairing them and buying parts, etc., etc. But I just zeroed those things, so I'm going to buy them from reputable sources like Peyton Street, and wait for them. And when they're there, yeah, maybe I'll pay a little premium because they're all fixed, repaired. The sack has been changed. They've been tuned. Somebody's telling me, Terry Morris is telling me the pen works. I believe Terry Morris. So there you have it. So I think in-house nibs are where it's at. And Nino, if you're listening, please complete that project. get back to, you know, that beautiful nib that you created, that fusion delta nib. That's where it's all about, Nino. And then your pen is going to take off. Then your pen is going to be differentiated. Then your pen is going to take on a completely different, on a different level. There you have it. So, conclusion, yes, I prefer in-house nibs over standard mainstream nibs, and I will go that extra mile to make sure that I get a pen with a in-house nib as opposed to a standard nib. Do they all work? No. Do you get some duds? Absolutely. But you know what? I'm going to keep trying. So there you have it. That's part 2. Stay tuned for part 3. We're going to present these not frequently. We're going to kind of do it, space them out, just because I have so many pens to review and to share with you. And like I said, we may add a 5th part, which is going to be a part with Joshua Lax, who is a Nibmeister, and he's going to tell us everything we need to know about Nibmeistering to kind of complete the series. So there you have it. Thank you very much for joining me. Please subscribe, and look out for those videos. I've got tons of pens coming, and we're going to be reviewing them like gangbusters. My golf game is over. You can tell I'm wearing warmer shorts. It's shirts. It's autumn here in Montreal, so maybe one more game and that's it. And we lock everything up, and we'll concentrate on fountain pen therapy. There you have it. Grazie. Ciao.